Over 500 million copies. It is a staggering number. In the entire history of publishing, very few stories ever reach the scale. To put that in perspective, that is more copies sold than Spider-Man, more than X-Men. But the most remarkable detail isn't the volume of sales, it is how they were produced. Instead of relying on rotating creative teams or constant continuity reboots, this story has been written and drawn by exactly one man, pushing out new chapters almost every single week since 1997. When a serialized story runs for that long, it usually caves in on itself. The lore contradicts itself, the cast becomes unmanageable, and the original magic dilutes. Eiichiro Oda bypassed that trap through an architectural discipline rarely seen in fiction. Instead, he plants tiny narrative seeds that will lay dormant for decades before finally blooming into massive payoffs. The world of One Piece is massive, covered almost entirely by ocean and divided by treacherous sea routes. Yet it begins on a smaller scale. The template for this epic is built early on, specifically during the Arlong Park sequence. Here, we find the crew's navigator, Nami, trapped in a cycle of forced labor and isolation, carrying the trauma of her enslaved village entirely on her own. When she finally breaks and asks for help, her captain, Luffy, doesn't offer a grand speech. Instead, he takes his most prized possession, his iconic straw hat, and places it on her head. That single, quiet action defines how this pirate crew operates. They are not bound together by a desire for plunder or infamy, but by an absolute, unspoken loyalty to each other's dreams. Grounding the story in these unbreakable, deeply intimate bonds creates a foundation. Because the reader cares so intensely about these specific individuals, Oda can safely escalate the geopolitical stakes as high as he wants later on. Entering the Grand Line reveals the world's true scope and its overarching antagonist, the world government. We learn of Ohara, an island of archaeologists studying forbidden texts. To bury those secrets, the regime unleashed a massive military strike, wiping them off the map. The sole survivor of that massacre was an 8-year-old girl named Nico Robin, who spent the next 20 years hunted, learning to expect betrayal at every turn. Over 300 chapters later, Robin voluntarily surrenders to the world government's assassins. She firmly believes her existence is a curse that will destroy her new friends, so she chooses to die to protect them. In response, a crew of 9 pirates attacks the world government's premier judicial island. They shoot down the world government's flag, declaring war on the entire world, just to hear Robin say she wants to live. Because readers spent years following Robin before understanding her pain, this defiance hits with maximum impact. Oda leverages the literal passage of real-world publishing time to make an abstract conflict against an authoritarian regime feel devastatingly personal. But a story stretching across decades requires genuine friction to maintain its tension. The trope of the invincible protagonist has to be broken, and that happens at the Battle of Marineford. After breaking into the world's most secure prison and fighting through a war involving the military's top brass, Luffy fails. His brother Ace dies in his arms, stepping in front of a fatal blow. The loss shatters him. Realizing they are outmatched, the crew enters a 2-year time skip, scattering across the globe to train in complete isolation. Enforcing profound, irreversible loss grounds the narrative. It proves that no matter how cartoonish or joyful the surface aesthetics might be, the threats in this world are real, and survival is not guaranteed. That tension culminates years later in the nation of Wano, where Luffy faces the strongest creature in the world to liberate a deeply oppressed population. After suffering repeated, brutal defeats, the ultimate narrative seed pays off. Luffy's standard rubber abilities awaken, revealing their true nature, the mythical power of the sun god Nika, a legendary figure of liberation. This triggers a bizarre, surreal transformation. The climactic battle abandons traditional gritty aesthetics, replacing them with the impossible, fluid physics of vintage rubber hose animation. This transformation weaponizes chaotic, absolute joy against an 800-year-old fascist regime. It asserts that the most effective way to break a system of rigid control is to simply refuse its logic of suffering. This shift aligns with the forbidden history Nika Robin has spent her life uncovering. The legendary treasure at the end of the Grand Line contains the specific knowledge of this suppressed past, providing the means to dismantle the world government's institutional control forever. The 25-year publication history has turned this narrative into a shared chronological event, allowing millions of readers to age alongside the characters they follow. Over 3 decades, Oda has turned a serialized manga into a literal, lifelong journey.